My name is Ed Cook, and I am a SCORE mentor in Canton, Ohio. I've been a SCORE mentor volunteer since 2013, right after I retired from PepsiCo. But if those of you that aren't aware what SCORE is, we are a national nonprofit uh, uh, organization that began back in 1964. Our first chapter was established in Dallas, Texas, and we now have over 200 chapters in the US. Our forte is really to mentor small businesses. So we mentor startups or existing businesses, whether they're for profit or nonprofit. And you can see by the big blue dot that those clients that do receive 3 hours of mentoring do report a more successful business. And that's data from the SBA. Next slide, please. Our mission is pretty simple. It's to support small business growth. We do that in a couple ways. Like I said, we provide free and confidential mentoring to small businesses. And we provide free educational webinars and workshops like this on topics that small businesses can benefit by. We believe that small businesses are important because they impact the national economy and they do provide job growth within the community. So, next slide, please. Um, We have a very large network of volunteers, like 8,000 of us. Some of us are retired, some of us are working, some of us are partially working, but we all share a very unique business skill set that we bring to our mentoring sessions. Next slide, please. We do sign an annual code of ethics, which basically says we can't benefit in any way from our clients. And whatever information is revealed, it's protected and confidential, guaranteed by the US government. Next slide, please. Our services are free. Our mentoring is free, and we hope to keep our workshops free as well. But there's three reasons we're able to do that. Number one is we are a resource partner with the SBA, meaning they refer people to us and we refer people to them. And we have a group of local sponsors that are very generous, that believe in what we're doing. And lastly, we have the 8,000 volunteers that volunteer their time to make these things possible. Next slide, please. Locally, we have platinum level sponsors like the Hoover Foundation, the Star Community Fund, Stark State College, the Akron Community Foundation, Key Bank. At the gold level, we have Huntington and the Calhoun Charitable Trust. Next slide, please. The silver level, we have People's Bank, the Wealthy Family Foundation, the Gertrude Orr Donor Advised Fund, the Youngstown Foundation, and lastly, at the bronze level, we have the Lerner Foundation, the Ripple Foundation, Consumers Bank, and the Munson Charitable Fund. Next slide, please. This is where you can get hold of us. If you need to find a mentor, it's very easy. As soon as you open up the website, it's right in front of you. You click on it, and based on your zip code, they'll assign you to the closest chapter to where you live. And we mentor you in person or via Zoom or via email, via phone call, whatever kind of works for the client. You can also click somewhere on the website if you have a business skill set that you're looking for some way to give back to the community. You can become a volunteer as well. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Chris, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Ed, and thank you and your fellow SCORE volunteers for all the work you do. I've referred over the years, I've referred a bunch of people to your services. It's organizations like SCORE that really kind of make small business run, right, and get stronger. So it's a great resource, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today. Today, I'm going to be talking about employee ownership as a business succession strategy. So some of you may have seen the business succession planning seminar that or webinar that we've done with SCORE in the past. This is kind of an adjunct to that, kind of delve into a specific type of succession strategy called employee ownership. So again, my name is Chris Cooper. I'm the director of the Ohio Employee Ownership Center. We're located at the main campus of Kent State University. We've been around for about 40 years. We're in our 40th year of operations. I just started my 26th year here. And so we do a bunch of different things, but specific to what I'm talking about here today, we help small businesses explore whether or not they want to transition their business successfully through our succession planning program and decide as part of that whether they want to sell to their employees through one of the major strategies that we're going to talk about today. So our mission is pretty simple, right? Retain businesses in local communities and build worker and employee wealth by expanding employee ownership. So we work primarily in Ohio, but we do work regionally and nationally as well. We are the longest continually operating state center for employee ownership here in Ohio, and so we're pretty proud of that as well. As Ed said, as we go through the presentation, I'd like to take questions as they come because it's usually better to have them asked um, in the context in which the question occurs to you, right? And so please use the Q&A function, as Ed said, to ask those questions. Ed's going to break in and let me know if you send any in. I'm here to talk employee ownership, right? I'm here to stay for as long as it takes. We have about 90 minutes on the schedule. So we'll probably have some time at the end as well if we want to delve into anything. And we'll talk later about if you want to explore things further, what resources we can provide you on that as well. So let's dig in. Oh, I see. I do that all the time. I talk in advance of my slides, but we provide that outreach and technical assistance on succession planning. We have a professional member network of 90 professionals that do the legal, the accounting, the financial stuff, and all of those kind of cool things. We don't do any of that work ourselves. We're kind of like the initial technical assistance piece, and we provide education and training for companies once they become employee owned as well. So I'll try not to do that again as we go through the slides. And we also do research and advocacy on the impact of employee ownership in the community. All right, so now we're going to get to the meat of the presentation. When we talk about these things, we talk about the silver tsunami, and some of you may have heard that term before. But what that basically means is we have an awful lot of baby boomer business owners. And, the next generation is starting to come up as well, right? So we're probably a little over halfway through baby boomers kind of reaching retirement age. Now we're going to have the next generation moving up there. I'm getting closer to it as well. So a lot of businesses are owned by folks that are going to be retiring and exiting their business within the next 5 to 15 years. And so less half of all small business owners in Ohio are 55 years or older. Less than half of small business owners have a formal succession plan. Roughly 20 to 30% of businesses put on the market actually sell. So often we hear that the kind of the golden goose that lays the golden egg out there is selling your business to an outside market. The fact is it's a buyer's market right now. There's a lot of money out there, a lot of large and small private equity out there that are interested in buying up businesses. And so they have their choice, when they kind of are in control of the situation, they can choose. So if your business doesn't fit the kind of niche of what people are looking for um, to buy, um, then you may not be able to get that outside buyer for your business. One of the other factors that we're seeing is only roughly 30% of family-owned businesses actually end up transferring to the next generation of family, right? We're seeing that a lot where the second or third generation in the family is if you're a successful business owner, you've been able to provide the opportunity for your children to kind of get their own career and get their own career goals in mind. And so
Eh, eh,
often we just don't see it quite as often where second and third and fourth generation family members want to take over the family business. So roughly
Hey,
only
hey,
30.
hey,
Yep.
Chris,
Yep.
we do have a question. How do you go about approaching the owner if you think it might be something that you'd like to do, if you're interested in purchasing the business?
Yeah, so that's a unique kind of question, right? Um, that's what we kind of call an employee kind of led buyout of the current ownership. Okay, so we're actually not going to gonna really go dig deep into that kind of component here during the presentation. But that's certainly something that we can talk. I can talk with them offline. It's a tricky question. One of the issues is how is that going to be financed? And it depends who the person is. Is it going to be a single person wanting to take buy the business, or is it going to be a group of leadership or management within the business? Um, it's got its own unique set of challenges and unique set of opportunities as well. And so how to make that initial approach can vary, right? It depends on the relationship that you have with that owner. If you're working within the business already, hopefully you have the relationship where you can approach the business owner that you work for. Um, and kind of at least broach the topic so you have an opportunity to talk it out.
Okay.
But what we're really kind of talking about here is more like a current owner driven process, if that makes sense, Ed.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I don't want to get too far off the presentation,
Okay.
but
All right.
yeah,
Chris,
but
do
I'm
you have
happy
a
to talk with them
do
about that either at the end when we're done or one on one as well.
do you have a contact slide for yourself at the end
I
with
I
with a
Yep, I
okay.
certainly do. Yep, I'm actually accidentally. Yeah, okay. I accidentally started advancing the slides, but yes, we have contact information, and one of the things we'll talk about at the end is the free technical, initial technical assistance services that we have, that
Okay.
anyone on the call today can reach out, and we'll set up a meeting.
All right. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. So with these facts of how many businesses put on the market actually sell and how many family-owned businesses actually transfer to the next generation, one of the benefits of employee ownership can essentially allow you as a business owner to create the buyer of your business, right? You can actually create that buyer instead of looking outside the business or looking for someone to buy the business. All right. So employee ownership defined, how we typically define employee ownership is broad-based. And what that means is all or most workers are given the opportunity to hold a financial stake in the company through one of the major models. What we won't be talking about here is kind of like the stock options. So we see a lot of, especially larger businesses, they'll offer some of their key employees the opportunity to purchase stock or get some form of equity in the business as part of the retention strategy. Or we might see where, over time, sort of like that, where that initial question was, Ed, is
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you'll have a key management person who's interested in buying the business. And so maybe that'll happen over time where they'll be able to purchase a 5 or 10% stake or whatever it might be in the business and gradually work that into a majority or 100% ownership interest. What we're talking about here is a little bit different. We're talking about broad-based employee ownership plans. And so it's basically three models that we're going to discuss. And one of the things that's not commonly known is that for that broad-based ownership definition, there's about 7,500 employee-owned businesses in the U.S. And so it's kind of more widespread than people think. There's about 10 million plus active workers that have an ownership stake through one or more of these options. And about 2 trillion assets are held by employees through these broad-based employee ownership models. With ESOPs, so we're going to talk about three models: ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans, and we'll define all of these models for you here. But just here in the US, there's about 6,500 ESOPs in the US, about 340 in Ohio. Worker cooperatives, another model. There's about 1,000 in the US and about 30 in Ohio. And there's also this brand new model called an employee ownership trust. There's about 100 of those, and it's a relatively new model. So there's only one in Ohio. We actually just worked with a business owner in Northeast Ohio in the Cleveland area, a company called the Music Box Supper Club that some of you may know. We just transitioned them to the first EOT, or Employee Ownership Trust, here in Ohio. So there's more employee owners and more employee-owned businesses out there than you may have thought. So as part of that, kind of understanding what the framework is and how many there are out there, there's a lot of common misconceptions about employee ownership, about broad-based employee ownership. One of those is it only works for small or niche firms, and employee-owned companies are actually found across all major sectors and among small, medium, and large-size firms. So we have some employee-owned companies that might be 3 or 4 or 5, 10 people, right? We have others that will be, 200, 100, 200, 500. And then we even have some that are in the thousands. We have some examples that I'll show you here in just a minute. Employees must finance the transaction. So typically, when we're talking about broad-based employee ownership options, the employees probably don't have the ability to finance the transaction. So typically, in most models, employees do not write checks. Transactions are typically financed through company cash flow. So basically, future earnings finance the purchase of the company from the seller and create this employee ownership structure. Sometimes it's a combination of cash flow. It's seller notes. Often with some of these models, the seller's actually got to take on some of the debt and actually becomes one of the creditors. So that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you feel about that as a business owner. And of course, there's also bank financing, or typically it's a combination of these things, right? And so there's the employees typically don't have the money on a broad-based basis to purchase the company, but there's ways that that transaction is financed. Employee ownership, one of the other misconceptions is employee ownership is risky or unproven. And in fact, it's not risky and it's not unproven. Employee-owned companies have a pretty good track record. So, for example, most ESOPs, we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, most ESOPs are leverage transactions, which means they're financed. And the default rates on those ESOP transaction notes is incredibly low. It's amazingly low. So ESOPs, tend to pay the bill for becoming an ESOP, right? And of course, decades of research and practice show that employee-owned firms have comparable or better performance on productivity, survival, and retention. We've seen that. We saw that back in the aughts with the banking crisis and in the financial crisis. Employee-owned companies tended to survive and even thrive during that period better than conventionally owned counterparts. And we're starting to see the research come out of the COVID crisis, right? That employee-owned companies tended to do a little bit better. There's a lot of reasons for that. And I'm happy to talk about those if someone's got some questions on that, what those reasons are. And one of the last misconceptions that we'll talk about is company operations radically change. Like we're doing something incredibly radical. This is weird. It's kind of how does it happen? And while, when you transition to an employee-owned company and to a broad-based employee-owned company, there will need to be changes, right? Things will change. But fundamentally, day-to-day management and operations typically remain mostly the same, right? Hopefully, right before this transition to an employee-owned business, the company is being run well, right? It's profitable, and those are the same things that you will see or hope to see after the transaction. You know, you need competent leadership. But in most models, the major change is how workers benefit financially while working at the company. So in addition to being an employee, they also get some kind of financial benefit to being an employee owner. And the last thing is the employee ownership culture. There will be some change. There will probably likely have to be some change in the culture, right? So instead of the owner kind of being in charge of all of the major decisions, maybe it's a slightly different cultural model in terms of employee input and all of those kind of things. But we're not talking about a change in which one day you're led by a management team and a business owner, and all of a sudden everybody's making every single decision within the company, right? We that's not the kind of changes that we're talking about here with the culture. But research again shows that if you combine that ownership stake with what we call a participatory culture, where you enable your employees to start thinking and acting like owners, company performance tends to really zoom up, and we've seen it in a lot of research over a number of years now. So, we're big fans of employee ownership, right? We think it probably could fit in most situations when we're talking about business exit planning. However, it may not be the best fit for you for your particular situation, right? So you have to determine not only is it possible, but is it the preferred option for your succession plan? And so we always say employee ownership is a powerful tool, but it's not a silver bullet, right? So when is it a good fit? Well, we find that employee ownership fits best when you're aligned with the selling owner's goals and objectives. That's a big piece of what we do when we first talk with a business owner is to try to figure out what their goals and objectives are. And so some of those are cash considerations and what the owner needs, right? For most business owners, roughly 80% of their net worth is tied up in their business. And so that's a huge, huge deal, right? You're probably going to need the proceeds from any business sale or transaction to help finance retirement, your secondary goals, family goals, all of those kind of things. So, what are your cash considerations and what are your needs and wants in terms of money, right? Expected timeline. How much time do you have from between now and when you want to be fully out of the business? One of the great things about employee ownership is you can still stay active within the business, right? You can cash out some of your equity, but also remain active and even in a leadership position often with the new employee-owned business. How much control do you want to maintain, right? That's always a biggest challenge for any business owner when they exit, whether they sell to their employees or sell to someone else or transfer it to children, is that kind of sense of control. So my dad was a small business owner, and part of the reason why I think he was because he was genetically incapable of working for someone else, right? Taking orders. So he had that kind of wanted to be the guy in charge. So you've got to kind of think about those things. And again, regardless if you're selling to employees or transferring to children or selling to an outside buyer, you're going to have to let go of a lot of that control, if not all of that control. And so you need to kind of think about those things. What's your thoughts about that? And but again, with most models of employee ownership, you can still stay active within the business and still exercise some control. Minimal cultural disruption. So we always kind of do a cultural assessment, right? How quickly can you kind of develop the kind of culture that kind of works best with an employee-owned company? Is that going to be a big transition or is that going to be a relatively minor transition? I always ask business owners, what happens when you go on vacation? Are you answering emails, taking calls, and solving problems? Or are you able to, take 2 weeks off and not worry about what's happening at the shop or at the company? And part of that is building that kind of leadership team, that management team that'll help run the business. in your absence. And that's the kind of thing we like to see with transitions to employee ownership. Because again, with any succession plan, eventually you're going to be taking yourself out of the equation. And if you're a big piece of what makes the business run, eventually that's going to catch up to you. And if that leaves the company, then a lot of the value and the operational strength of your business leaves as well. We see the other big thing for business owner or from business owners that are interested in employee ownership is the concern for their legacy, concern for their employees, and concern for their community. Employee ownership tends to anchor businesses within the community in which they're located. It also helps business owners think about the legacy. So a lot of times, like for example, when you sell to an outside buyer, a lot of things are going to change within that business, right? The name, it could be the name, the operations, maybe some of the people are let go, right? A lot of these things can change. And how important is that to you? Do you feel that you would like to develop a strategy that, helps take care of the employees, the folks that helped you build this business? I know with my dad's business, the employees that he had, they were part of the family, right? Weddings, I always say weddings, funerals, and birthdays, right? They were part of the family. And so how important is kind of maintaining that legacy, that culture, that community, the family feeling that you have with your employees? Employee ownership can help you meet those goals. The company should be stable because, especially in most cases, employee-owned company, the transaction is financed through future cash flows of a business, right? That's going to pay off that debt to purchase the equity from the seller. And so the company should be stable and profitable. That's kind of like one of the initial things that we find out, right? Is the company, do you have a lot of debt? Debt, banks or other financial providers will only let you borrow so much against the business. If you already have a lot of debt, this may not work for you. Putting too much debt service onto the back of a company can be not just detrimental, but diabolical almost, right? It can be a really strong or really bad thing. So you have to have minimal debt, likely. Strong management and leadership. It gets back to the kind of like, what do you do when you go on vacation kind of thing, right? Is there strong management leadership that can run the business profitably, right, in your absence? Typically, most employee ownership models require 10 or more employees, though less is possible. And we'll talk about that as we go through some of the models. So let's kind of break down the three major models. We've got some animations here that I didn't know I had. But we're going to start talking about employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs. They're by far the most common form of employee ownership. Right now, there's probably about 90%. So you saw some of the numbers I gave you earlier. Probably about 90% of employee-owned companies, broad-based employee ownership companies, are ESOPs, and a lot of well-known names. So Wawa, Gore-Tex, Publix, probably the single largest employee-owned or ESOP-owned company in the U.S. They're a chain of grocery stores mostly located in the Southeast. There's a bunch of local companies. Davy Tree, right here in Kent, Ohio, is one of the largest employee-owned companies. They're headquartered here in Kent, but they have operations through probably most of the U.S. and a big part of Canada as well. Great Lakes Brewing Company, right? They have an ESOP. Graders is one of the new ESOPs. They're a ice cream company, and they're located mostly, I think, in Cincinnati, but I think they move up north towards Columbus as well. So you might have heard of Graders. Bueller's. So we're talking about Akron Canton Score office right here, right? So most of you might be familiar with Bueller's. They have an ESOP. Drug Mart has an ESOP. Maybe I was out on the turnpike the other day, Rulin Company, the construction company. You might see their trucks around. I see a lot of them on the turnpike doing construction. They're an employee-owned company, and there's a bunch of others as well. So
Hey,
one of the weird,
Chris.
yep,
Hey, Chris, is the participation in it automatic or the employees can volunteer to be part of the program?
yeah. So with an ESOP, it's automatic. So we'll talk. I'll address that specifically here in the rest of the
Okay,
slide.
cool. All right,
Yep.
cool.
So an ESOP is a qualified retirement plan. So there's some similarities to IRAs and 401ks. But the big difference is that the ESOP invests in the stock of the sponsoring company rather than in the stock market or some kind of mutual fund, right? And so basically, there it's regulated by federal law and agencies. ERISA is the big federal law that governs qualified retirement plans. It's because it's a retirement plan that provides tax breaks. Both the DOL and the IRS are going to kind of be regulating this. And so, just like a 401k, there's minimal requirements to qualify to be a participant, but they're relatively low and easy to meet. So basically, work at least 1,000 hours, be at least I think it's 21 is the basic floor, and be employed by the company at the on the last day of the plan year, and you're in, right? So it's pretty easy. So with an ESOP, they do not you're in or you're not. If you qualify, you're in, right? So it's not a choice for the employee owners. A couple of the other models, it can be a choice for the employee whether they want to participate. But with an ESOP, if you meet the requirements, you're in. Just like if you meet the requirements for the company's 401k, you're in. If you meet the requirements to participate in the company's IRA, you're in, right? Typically, ESOPs work better with companies that have 30 or more employees. We'll talk a little bit about why that might be here in a few slides. The financial profile is at least like 1 million in EBITDA, right? So that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That's a number that you can kind of figure out when you look at your financial statements. And so it needs to be a certain size. And part of that is because of the regulations and some of the cost of both setting it up and maintaining it can be a little bit higher than with other options that you might have. So the company should be, and again, also with the way the ESOP transaction is financed, right? It needs to be typically of a certain size. We have a few ESOPs that are less than 30 employees, but that's typically means like 25, 26, or 27 employees, somewhere in that range. A company type is either an S corp or a C corp. So an ESOP is not a type of corporate entity. It kind of just sits on top as a qualified retirement plan. It sits on top of the corporation. So you can be either an S corp or a C corp. As of now, it's you can't really do an ESOP in an LLC. So if you're currently an LLC or a partnership or some other form, at right before the ESOP transaction, you would have to convert, right, to either an S corp or a C corp. An ESOP can own anywhere from 1 to 100% of the stock of the company, right? So I think Great Lakes is what we would call a minority ESOP. It's not majority owned by the ESOP. Davy Tree is 100% ESOP. I'm not sure about Bueller's, but an ESOP can own 1% of the company, or it can own 100% of the company, right? There's no real required governance rights. There's a few, but they're pretty basic. You can expand those governance rights, but typically the ESOP is not necessarily going to exert a lot of control over the company by default, right? So the employee owners, there's certain situations when employee owners can vote the shares that they get within their ESOP account, but those are relatively few. You can always expand those though, right? Tax benefits. So ESOPs have a ton of tax benefits, and we'll explain a few of those here in a few minutes, but they have a bunch of them for the selling owner, for the company as an operating employee-owned company, and for the employees as well. Because of the rules and regulations, right, the setup costs can be a little bit on the higher side, right? So $200,000 to about $750,000. And a lot of that is dependent on the size of the company, the complexity of the company, how it's being financed. I just worked with a company that had, I think, 15 different owners. So kind of working through that complex ownership structure can increase the cost. So that's again another reason why the company should probably be of a certain size. All right. So now we're going to talk about worker co-ops. So this is just kind of a general overview of the three major models. Then we're kind of dig in a little bit deeper uh, with each one. A worker cooperative is one of the oldest forms of employee ownership in the U.S. So worker co-ops have been around since literally the 19th century. And so what makes worker cooperatives unique? It's a type of corporation. So you would actually incorporate you would convert to this corporation called a cooperative. And so cooperative law is state law, just like a lot of corporate law is state law, right? So you've heard of the Delaware Corporation, right? A lot of people start incorporate their business in another state because of the state laws around incorporation, right? So you can do that with a worker cooperative as well. There's different states that have different statutes that define what a worker cooperative is. To kind of give you a sense of what a worker cooperative is, it's unique because it's a type of corporation, and basically cooperatives exist in a lot of different industries, and we'll kind of talk about that here when we get to the cooperatives. But it's an it shares a lot of things with other types of entities, like a partnership, like an LLC. It's got some similar things, but the financial profile is basically the company should be profitable, right? Again, in most cases, these conversions are going to be financed by future cash flows. So the company's got to be profitable, right? It's got to be making cash, right? The company type you can incorporate as a formal cooperative. One of the things that we're seeing now is some companies are actually incorporating as an LLC and then creating kind of the cooperative like corporate kind of governance structure. So that's becoming a model. Ownership is typically 100%. You're either a worker cooperative or you're not a worker cooperative, right? So again, it's a type of corporate entity. So you either are or you're not, right? The governance rights are broader than within ESOP. Member owners. So like an LLC, you become a member to be an owner of the cooperative. So members vote for and can serve on the board of directors. So it's got a lot of similarities with some of these other corporate structures that we'll talk about. There's not as many tax benefits, but for the selling owner is the big one. And we'll talk about that here in a slide. But there are some tax breaks to sell your company to a worker cooperative, and there's a few kind of tax breaks for the company as well. The setup costs are a lot lower, however. So that's one of the benefits that you can have. 20,000 to 75,000, maybe a little bit more if it's a larger company. But the costs to set up are a lot lower, and the kind of the annual maintenance costs tend to be almost non-existent, right? You're just basically at that point, you're running your business rather than running the cooperative, if that makes sense, right? So the setup costs are a lot lower. Here's some local examples. There's a big one up in Cleveland called the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry. It's got about 250, I think, employees. There's an installation, Berry Insulation, Patty Cake Bakery. If you've been down to Columbus, their bakery. Shine Nurture Center is a child care cooperative down in Cincinnati. So is Sustainergy. They do installation, retrofitting, and solar installations for both commercial and housing. And some of you may have heard of Lefco Worthington, a company up in Cleveland as well. So there's a bunch of examples of worker cooperatives. Then we have this new one called Employee Ownership Trust. And so it's a relatively new model here in the US. They're very common in the United Kingdom. So the John Lewis Partnership that you see there at the top of the slide is probably the most well-known one in the UK. I think they've got like 3,000 employees or something along those lines. But there's some other ones here too. Typically, what you're doing is you're selling the company to what's known as a perpetual purpose trust. So you're creating this trust that put the assets, you sell the assets of the company into that trust. You put that into the trust. Future cash flows of the company will pay you for that ownership interest. And so you're just setting up this entity that holds the stock of the company. Um, Typically, 10 or more employees is kind of a good fit. Less is possible. But unlike, I think with a co-op, the co-op is probably better for less than 10 employees rather than an employee ownership trust, but you can do it. Again, it needs to, since it's going to be financed, the transaction is going to be financed through future cash flows. You should be profitable company, right? In order to do that, you should be able to take on debt as well in order to do that. So any kind of company can be put into the trust, and you're not changing the corporate structure. You're just moving, you're just trading ownership entities that are owning this, right? So you can be a C Corp, S Corp, LLC, any kind of company can fit. Unlike with a worker cooperative, you can do 1 to 100% as well. Typically, what we see, there's not a lot of examples out there of employee ownership trusts, but typically what we see is it's 100%, but you don't have to do 100%. Governance rights are pretty flexible, so we got to slide on that here coming up in a few minutes. There may be some estate tax benefits for selling your company to a perpetual purpose trust or an EOT, but there's not a lot. But the good news is the setup costs are moderate. And so it's again a lot cheaper to set up, and it's probably a lot cheaper to maintain as you operate as an employee-owned business. So now we're going to dig. So that's kind of the overview of the models. Now we're going to dig into some specifics about each one. So we're going to talk about an ESOP, as I mentioned. It's a qualified retirement plan. It's a lot like a 401k, but it invests primarily in the stock of the sponsoring company. You can also contribute cash into your ESOP, but primarily the asset that the ESOP holds is the stock of the sponsoring company. There's no employee contribution, unlike with a 401k or an IRA, right? There's no employee contribution, so it's 100% funded by the company. So it's which is from the employee perspective, you don't have to put any of your own money into the transaction. So they're administered similarly to other qualified retirement plans with some unique aspects, but basically you have to qualify to be a participant. You have to formally enter the plan. You have to vest, typically, right? 3 or 6 year vesting period. And like other qualified retirement plans, if you're an employee owner, you get your money at the back end when you either leave the company or retire from the company at normal retirement age. An ESOP is actually a form of trust, so it's actually an ESOP trust that owns the stock. And you have a trustee. All trusts have a trustee, and there's dedicated ESOP trustees out there that can be the trustee for your company. You can also have what's known as an internal trustee for the day-to-day operations of the trust. What makes an ESOP different from a 401k, among other things, is that the ESOP you actually finance the transaction through this employee ownership trust. So the ESOP can actually borrow money, and that's a tax advantaged way for the company to sell itself to the ESOP. Um, it can get to be a very complicated structure, and we don't really have enough time. Each one of these models can be their own 90-minute seminar, right? I'm happy to talk about some of those complexities if that's what the folks would like, or if you want to reach out to me afterwards, and happy to set up that meeting with you to discuss what those are. But there's a that provides a lot of tax benefits by financing it that way through the ESOP. Most ESOPs are created through leverage or through credit, right? Through that debt kind of process. But there's also an opportunity to set up the ESOP and make it what they call a contributory ESOP. So over a long period of time, you contribute stock from the company into that ESOP. Okay. That's very, very, very rare. And again, it kind of requires a long timeline for which to transfer stock, right? But again, you don't have to transfer the entire ownership interest within that ESOP, right? So maybe you just want to do a contributory ESOP of, single digit percentages and use it as just another form of compensation for your people. ESOPs need to be held into a C Corp or an S Corp. An S Corp has some additional tax advantages for the operating company. We've got a slide coming here next. And again, they're highly regulated, so there's a higher cost both in setup and maintenance. So let's talk about the tax savings because this is kind of what a lot of business owners, as they're thinking about to selling their company to an ESOP, want to talk about. So the tax savings from a leverage ESOP can equal 100% of the transaction value over time and occurs basically at three levels. The first is the company. So again, since you can finance the transaction through the ESOP, this tax exempt employee ownership trust, the company can actually deduct the principal and the interest payments to whoever they borrow the money from. So if you've ever owned a home, you know that you can deduct your interest that you pay on your mortgage, but you can't deduct the principal. Well, with an ESOP, you can deduct both the principal and interest, and you basically pay back the loan by making a tax deductible contribution to the ESOP, which the ESOP then uses to it's a complicated transaction, but basically the ESOP will then use that contribution to pay off the loan. If you become an S Corp ESOP, you have the ability to pass through earnings to the trust tax free, right? So if you know the difference between an S Corp and a C Corp, an S Corp is not taxed at the corporate level, and the ESOP is a tax exempt trust. So if you are a 100% ESOP owned, oh, I'm sorry, an S Corp that's 100% owned by the ESOP, the corporation's not paying tax, the ESOP's not paying income tax, so the company is operating 100% income tax free. Now, that's only available for S Corps at this moment, right? But that's a huge tax break for the company, right? You're not paying a federal income tax um, on the earnings, right? Your annual earnings, right? So that's huge. When you're a seller, you if you sell at least 30% of the company to the ESOP, you can defer and sometimes totally avoid paying capital gains tax through what we call the 1042 rollover. The 1042 is the section of the tax code, and this benefit is mostly available only to C Corps. So it gets a little weird. Like if you want to do the C Corp to get the seller capital gains treatment, then after the transaction, you can typically switch to an S Corp, depending on what you were before you became. If you switch from an S to a C to take advantage of the capital gains, you typically have to wait 5 years to switch back over to an S Corp. If you are currently in a C Corp or an LLC, I'm sorry, if you're currently a C Corp, you can do the 1042 rollover for the seller and then almost immediately switch over to a 100 to an S corporation, right? So again, it can get a little complicated, and I'm trying to kind of cover it enough, right? But happy to dig into the details on that if you wish. But you know that could be a big deal for the seller, right? To not have to pay or just defer that capital gains treatment. Basically, what happens if you hold on to those what we call qualified replacement properties, if you invest your proceeds and those properties stay in your estate at the time that the state goes to your heirs, the heirs get the step up in basis. Okay, if that makes sense. And so then you totally avoid the capital gains tax completely. And then for the employee, you don't pay any taxes on as contributions are made to the ESOP and you get allocated stock or cash into your ESOP account. You only pay when you take your distributions, and that's usually at separation or retirement. So you can accumulate um, some real value in your ESOP account. And when you take it out, you'll be taxed that'll be taxed as ordinary income. So you get tax-free appreciation, and you pay the tax when you start taking the selling back the stock to the company. So here's an example of a company down in Columbus called Parallel Technologies that became an ESOP, I think about seven or 8 years ago. So this is Don Poling, the president of the company, and he was one of the selling owners. And you can see the company was established in 83. So the ESOP was established in 2020. So I had my dates wrong. So it's been about 6 years. They've got over 100 employees. I think they just went out and purchased another company and rolled them into the ESOP. And Don's a really great guy. So you can see how he feels about his employees. And there was a big reason why they did it, right? Their feels their employees are core for Parallel, and transitioning to that employee-owned company both rewards them for years of service, but also I think is a future motivational compensation strategy, sustainable business model, and rewarding work experience. And so they have got a great culture. We've been working with them on their post-transaction culture and stuff, and it's a great little company in Columbus. So that gives you a little taste of someone who's done it. So we're going to go to worker cooperatives now. And so, like I said at the previous slide, it's a type of corporate entity or corporation. A lot of people think of this weird thing called a worker cooperative is really strange, and it's got some unique aspects for sure, but it also has some similarities with partnerships, LLCs, and CNS Corp. So with partnerships and LLC, so LLC, if you have an LLC, owners are called members. If you have a worker cooperative, owners are called members. And so you actually become a member of the corporation, right? Just like you do with a partnership, or you become a partner with a partnership or a member with an LLC. It's got some unique tax aspects to it. So for some things, it's taxed like a C corp, and for other things, it's taxed like an S corp, like with a pass-through entity. So depending on the type of business that you are and how you conduct that business, the corporation will pay some of the tax. And depending on other things, it's the individual member owners that'll pay some of that tax on an annual basis, just like an S corp owner would do. The business is owned and governed by its employees. So again, it has broader governance rights for the employee owners or the member owners of the worker cooperative. Typically, that's done on a one share, one vote basis, right? So if you're a member, you have one share and you have one vote for major corporate decisions. Now, again, this is typically major corporate decisions, right? Typically, we don't see worker co-ops where like, do I buy another box of copy paper, right? Typically, those aren't like decisions that you send to the member owners to vote on, right? It's typically for large corporate decision making, just like you would with a shareholder business, right? The shareholders vote on major decisions. The board of directors, by law, in most cases, have to be majority of the member owners, of the worker owners, the employee owners, right? And you can have outside board members, but typically the board is a majority member owners. Unlike with typical corporations, so in a typical corporation, the higher ownership stake you have, the right you also have to more of the profits in a given year. If you own 60% of the company, you are entitled to 60% of the profits, right? With a worker cooperative, it tends to separate that. So the ownership, the decision making, the governance is one share, one member, one vote. But the profit sharing is typically done on what is known as patronage. Okay, it's basically a dividend. It in this way, it's really like an S corporation, right? So unlike with an S corporation that's based on ownership, on percentage of ownership, it's based on hours worked. So the more you work in the worker cooperative, the more of the idea is the more input you are having on the profits, on the generation of the profits. So you have a greater right to the ownership of the profits at the end of the year. Hopefully that makes sense, but it's really based on hours worked. So the more labor input that you provide to the company, the more profit output you're entitled to, if that makes sense. So, unlike with an ESOP, where the qualifications are pretty low, employees actually choose to become owners. So they have to typically pay a membership fee to become owners and buy in to receive their right to vote and the right to profit sharing, right? So we have a number of worker cooperatives that maybe 60% of the employees are actually employee owners, and the rest have decided we don't want to be employee owners, and so they're not, right? So it's both a choice by the company to offer it, and it's both, and then it's also a choice by the employee owner to actually buy in and start being called a member owner, right? There are some federal tax benefits. I kind of mentioned that C and S Corp kind of thing. But worker cooperatives have their own unique tax code. It's called Subchapter T. That's the section of the tax code. And so it's kind of unique. And I won't go into a lot of detail about the kind of uniqueness of it, but I'm happy to do that if someone's got a question or wants to talk about it. Basically, what that means is you probably have to find a dedicated accountant, tax accountant, right, to help you with your taxes that is familiar with how to both track and pay your taxes and do all that kind of tax stuff at the end of the year. So that's one of the challenges is finding we have a bunch of co-op accountants that can help you with that, but not every accountant will be able to do that subchapter T tax accounting. So why choose a worker cooperative? Well, I think it emphasizes worker input and strongly supports employee engagement and ownership culture. I think if you feel that that's an important aspect of what you want to do with the business, then I think worker co-ops do that really well. It's a great path for both wealth building over the long term and also profit sharing on an annual basis, right? So it's got components of short-term benefit as well as long-term benefit as you're building your equity within the business as as an employee owner. There are some tax benefits, as I mentioned. You can get you if you're a seller and you sell to a worker cooperative, you can also do that 1042 rollover capital gain thing, right? That's also available for worker co-ops as it is for ESOPs. And the business, as an operating business, can also deduct profit sharing on an annual basis. Any profits that are shared with the company, it's a tax deduction. You can do that through a tax deduction at the company level. Worker co-ops work well for smaller businesses, right? When we're talking about in the state of Ohio, for example, our worker co-ops says it's at least got to have two employees, two employee owners, right? So you can do anywhere from two to, there's some worker co-ops, like I mentioned, the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry has a couple hundred employee owners. Um, and typically, you can do a lot smaller company in terms of EBITDA as well, as low as $100,000, right? So you can be a relatively small company and utilize this option. And of course, there's a lower cost to set up and maintain, as I mentioned earlier as well. So there's no real regulation on worker co-ops apart from general, like you can't cheat on the taxes, you can't misappropriate funds, and those kind of things, right? But there's no special kind of rules and regulations around worker co-ops. So here's a good example of Berry Insulation. They're a 10-year-old energy efficiency business and they transitioned to a worker cooperative in 2020. They've got about 20 employees. Martin Berry was the selling owner and president. And you can see he's a great guy. I've met him a few times. Every step they take on the pathway, we will see more energy, teamwork, and curiousness about the business, with everyone working toward the same goal. And it is. We've done some training for them as a worker cooperative, and we are really teaching folks how to think and act like an owner, right? And it's pretty powerful when you can see every employee in your company thinking and acting like an owner and seeing how they can improve the business going forward, right? It's a powerful thing that we see in employee-owned businesses, and it can have a real huge impact on the financial performance and just the general performance of the business. Right. So now we're going to do the employee ownership trust. I'm going to take a quick sip of my tea here. And employee ownership trust, or EOT, is what we call it. I'll probably refer to it as an EOT from here on out. Is a trust. Again, it's another trust vehicle, so of course it's going to have a trustee as well that holds some or all of the shares of a company on behalf of a purpose, including the benefit of employees. So we're going to talk about, I'll give some examples. We have an example company that just happened here that I'll explain that a little bit more. In EOT provides permanent or long-term ownership of a business through the trust. And it's highly customizable. There's really not a lot of rules. So you have a kind of a blank slate kind of thing, right? You can customize the structure both in terms of the financial benefit for the employee owners as well as the kind of cultural or governance kind of benefit that you provide the employee owners and can facilitate a wide range of objectives. So we generally say, generally every employee owned, if you see one employee owned company, you've seen one employee owned company because they all are very unique in how they kind of operate as an employee owned company. But EOTs kind of take that to another level, right? Where the structure is so customizable that you have a wide range of options and you can meet a wide range of objectives as a selling owner. All employees are membership of the ownership group, so the trust holds the stock of the company for the benefit of all employees. And there's no real kind of requirement in order to be considered. You either, if you're an employee, you're kind of in, right? Employees are represented typically in the governing bodies of the business. What that looks like, though, really can vary by quite a bit. And an EOT distributes annual or quarterly profit sharing. Typically, that's how they get the financial benefit of ownership to their employees. There's potentially other benefits. This is typically where we kind of see some basic requirements to engage or participate in the profit sharing. So um, you're in as long as you're an employee, but you benefit from the profit sharing. You can create a rule that says you only benefit from the profit sharing if you meet certain requirements, right? That's how kind of flexible the model is. So you can, you can again structure this in a lot of different ways. A lot of flexibility, as I said, almost a blank slate. One of the great things is it protects the business from future acquisition or even dissolution, right? And the example that I have here on the next slide, I'll explain some of that. It's easy to accommodate a partial sale or in sale of it all, right? If you just need to cash out some of your equity and and do things with that with cashing that with the cash that you generate, you can do that, or you can transfer the entire business. Support employee wealth building through profit sharing and other benefits. You can do cash in hand on a annual, a quarterly basis, or even investing in some kind of long-term retirement plan for your employee owners. Can work for smaller businesses, basically five or more employees, and EBITDA as low as $100,000. Again, that's pretty small, right? That's pretty low. And they're relatively easy to put in place, right? Nothing is ever truly easy, right? But when compared to other options, they're relatively easy to put in place. So the example we have here is the one Employee Ownership Trust or EOT here in Ohio, and it just happened. So we've been working with Mike Miller of the Music Box Supper Club for about 12 to 15 months or so. Um, Actually, that date there is wrong. I didn't correct the date. It's actually February of 2026. So they just converted about a month and a half ago, right? They just signed the paperwork. So I apologize for the typo there. But Mike is a really interesting guy. He considered Music Box both the value that the business has created over the years. He felt that was in big part by the work of his employees, right? And he wanted to figure out a way to reward them for that. But he also felt that the Music Box Supper Club was a community resource and a community asset as well. And so I think the aspects of the Perpetual Purpose Trust made a lot of sense to him. And the idea is to both reward the employee owners through profit sharing and other opportunities to participate in how the company is run, but also by this perpetual purpose trust to kind of keep this business open for the long term for the community as well. And so he's a great guy. And so this is a quote. I don't, it's so recent. I didn't have a picture of Mike, but this is a quote that he gave to Crane's Cleveland Business. There was a story in there a few weeks ago. He says wanted the music box to continue, wanting it to continue became very important, especially when he was looking at the quality and loyalty of the staff and the and a lot of community kind of aspects to that as well. And he realized that impacting their lives too, if we sold, was going to be a negative thing, right? And so all of those things were an important part of this. He had offers to sell the company to outside buyers, but he wasn't sure what was going to happen to this thing that he's created, right? This thing of value that he's created. So the employee ownership trust made a lot of sense for Mike. So again, kind of went through a lot of technical stuff really quickly, right? And again, each one of these models we could do 60, 90 minutes on by themselves. And but just wanted to give you a taste of what the models are all about. I think if you're interested in learning more, this is a basic outline of what we call the assessment process. The initial exploration and discussion. I think it's always good to meet with your current advisors. Most of the advisory community understands ESOPs. Fewer understand worker co-ops, so it's a little more specialized, and even fewer still understand how to do EOTs. And so perhaps your current set of advisors won't be able to help you, but I always recommend you start there, right? What about this employee ownership thing? Assess kind of how they might be able to help you. I think the next step could be you might want to meet with us, right? So we've got a pretty good kind of high level understanding of all of the models. We can sit down with you and talk about your goals and objectives and how employee ownership might meet them, kind of give you the pros and cons of each, right? We're big fans of employee ownership, but again, it may not fit with every situation and it might not fit with for your situation, right? So we can kind of have that conversation. But what we would talk about with you is what are your goals and objectives? Right? We talked about legacy. It could be how you feel about your employees, right? It could be any number of things, right? You need to maximize proceeds, right? You need the money for some reason or another, right? But assess your goals and objectives, figure out what your size and financial stability of the business is, right? If you're too small for an ESOP, you're just kind of too small for an ESOP, right? The other models are less dependent on size, right? But there might be some discussion around that. And again, most of these transactions are done through future cash flows, so you got to assess the financial stability of the business. What's your sense of what your ongoing role wants to be? Are you looking to continue in some form or another in the new employee-owned business? You can typically do that. There might be some strings attached to how you do that, depending on the model. Or are you looking to get completely out, right? You're ready to disengage, right? I talk to business owners all the time. They wake up one day and say, I think I'm done. I'm ready to go. So what are my options? What's your timeline, right? Some of these things might take a little longer than others, right? There's a lot of mitigating circumstances that might force you to rethink what your timeline is, right? What's your governance culture and control assessment, right? How much control do you currently have? Do you have a leadership team which does a lot of the day-to-day operational stuff? What's your culture like? How do you feel about worker cooperative governance? How do you feel about EOT governance or ESOP, right? All of those things are important for us to kind of figure out where you are and as to whether employee ownership makes sense as a fit. We can also do referrals and help you develop your advisory team. One of the things, so we're not the attorneys, we're not the financial planners, we're not the CPAs. And so we can help make referrals for that kind of stuff, but also we can help you locate the right professionals depending on your situation and what your goals are and what model you might choose as to where you go from here. How are we going to finance this, right? Is there going to be seller financing? Is it going to be bank financing? Is it going to be a combination? Leadership, management, succession, that stuff's all important as well. And what kind of culture shift are we talking about here for your business? So we have a couple books for you, free books. So I'm going to send the PDFs of these books to Ed so he can send them out to all of you. for free. So one is the book we did a few years ago on business succession planning and owner's manual. That's got a bunch of worksheets in the back that might help you as you start thinking about succession or your exit plan. Defining your goals and objectives. It kind of explores all your transfer options, not just employee ownership, and how you develop and implement your business succession plan and think and get started to think about your personal plan. Then this is a new book, the second book, Selling Your Business to your Employees. We just published this earlier this year, about a month or so ago, and it provides an overview of all the models that we talked about here. Gives you a little more details about how each works, and it's a good start to kind of explore learning more about the different models and saying, hey, is one of these something that you want to consider for your business? Um, and it's got a bunch of both of the books have a bunch of sidebars from professionals, so it's not just us talking to you, but it's professional advisors giving you their opinion as well. So I'll make sure that you get those. And again, our
Hey,
one on,
hey, Chris,
yeah,
one
yep,
quick question from me is, did we schedule another webinar for the first book you were showing there, basic, can you flip backward? Yeah. Did we
yeah,
set a date for business succession planning?
yeah, we do. And for the life of me, Ed, I forget what the date it is, but
Yeah,
it's
me
later in the
too.
year.
Okay,
So,
all right. Sorry to
yep.
interrupt. Go ahead.
No, no, that's fine. So Ed is mentioning, so I did a previous presentation on general business succession planning, right? And we're going to be doing a rerun of that later in the year as well. So keep an eye out on your score emails, right, that you get for that session. One of the things we also do is no cost initial technical assistance and exploration. So we're lucky to be funded by the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, the Gunn Foundation, and a donor advised fund from the Greater Atlanta Foundation, right, to provide no cost initial technical assistance and exploration. So this covers whether you just want to start exploring exit planning generally, if you want to dive deep into employee ownership specifically, right? We're happy to talk. We talk to anyone and everyone, right? And so we're willing to kind of start that with like a virtual call, right? A Zoom call kind of thing. But we can meet with you. We can do no cost referrals to relevant professionals. We got a large network of professionals that we work with that can do specific components of the technical stuff that you need. We can help you assess your current set of advisors, right? Generally no or low cost ongoing consultation and support through the process. Each one of those grants that we get have strings attached to them, right? And so depending on where you're located or what you want to do, right? There might be a low cost kind of thing, but typically that's no cost ongoing consultation. So I mentioned that with Music Box Supper Club and their EOT, we've been working with them for about 12 to 16 months, right? And kind of being a sounding board for their process. We connected them with the relevant professionals to help them do it. And that was all provided at no cost to them because they were located in Cleveland. We were able to use our Cleveland Foundation grant to pay for those services, right? And then we also do before and after transaction education, training, and culture building, right? Sometimes it's free, sometimes there's a small fee. So we're pretty reasonable. But again, it's depending on a lot of different components of who you are and where you're located and those kind of things as to whether there would be a fee. But again, I feel our fees are pretty reasonable. But if you're outside of the areas that we can work in, then we don't have we're not being subsidized for that work. So sometimes there will be a smaller fee for that kind of stuff. And finally, I think is the contact information that Ed was mentioning at the onset. So here's our contact info. You're going to get these slides that'll have clickable links there. But we're here for you. So this is my colleague Mike Palmieri. He and I are the two main staff members that do this kind of work, and so you can reach out to either of us. And if you want to set up a meeting, if you've got questions, shoot us an email or give us a call. And we're here to help.
Can they meet via Zoom or does it need to be in person?
No, typically we have that first one in Zoom, right? And if we have, so when I, for example, when I worked with Mike, I worked with him for about 12 months without actually meeting him in person. Eventually, we ended up meeting in person, right?
Hmm.
But it's typically we do a lot of stuff via Zoom. It just makes it, a little bit easier, especially for those initial conversations. Um, and I'm here to answer any additional questions that you have.
Okay. Actually, there are no questions that are open right now. So this is everybody's last chance, unless you want to reach out to Chris on a personal level. There's really nothing in chat. Mary Ann actually was able to share some of your contact information with everybody earlier in the webinar. So,
Okay, cool.
all right. Hey, with that, Chris, thank you for your time and
Sure.
a lot of information there that you shared. I'm sure it was well received.
Yeah, because
Those of you, okay.
one of the things about the questions, Ed, is it's so much information, and and I get that maybe you're like, oh, I gotta digest this first, right, before I
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
questions to
really,
ask. So
really. I'm sure once they receive a copy of your PowerPoint, they'll dig in and reach out, I think. So,
yeah, and the books too. The books explain a lot of things too in greater
okay,
detail.
cool. All right. Thank you, well, one question popped up.
Okay.
Pete just thank you for the presentation. So, you're welcome, Pete.
Yep.
Reach out to Chris if you have any further questions. All right, everybody, have a great day, and we'll talk soon. So long. Thanks
All
again,
right. Thanks,
Chris.
Ed. Yep.
Bye
Take
bye.
care, Ed. Bye.
Bye bye.